Hey Rachel, do you know what the Russian Revolution was? I need to research about it for my world history project.
Do you want to find out?
Sure.
The Russian Revolution was a series of revolts by the Russian citizens that led to the establishment of the Soviet Union. The official revolution lasted from March of 1917 to November of 1917.
Before the revolution, Russia was ruled by the Romanov family, the last being Tsar Nicholas II. He had absolute power over the whole country but wasn't an efficient ruler. The wars he began resulted in the unjust deaths of millions of Russians. The form of government during his rule was known as a Tsarist autocracy.
However, Tsar Nicholas II's authority was weakened after Japan won the Russo-Japanese War of 1904, in which the Russian and Japanese empires fought over imperial ambitions in Manchuria and Korea. This loss made Russian citizens feel humiliated and angry, which broke the trust between the citizens and Tsar Nicholas II.
One of the main events that sparked the Russian Revolution was Bloody Sunday.
For centuries, other European countries narrowed the gap between the rich and poor, and living conditions were improved. However, the financial gap in Russia became even greater due to cases like food shortages or low wages. The lack of progress compared to other countries left the workers feeling very irritated.
Due to this, a series of strikes occurred in many cities in which the workers demanded better working conditions and rights. Liberals in charge of these strikes organized a union to better coordinate the people, ultimately hoping to set up a democratic government. Their efforts resulted in a massive general strike, referred to as Bloody Sunday, against the government in mid-October 1905, which forced Tsar Nicholas II to introduce Duma, a Russian assembly with legislative functions.
The second main cause of the revolution was World War I. When Germany first declared war on Russia, the Russians were very patriotic. Experts Anastasia Tumanova and Elena Lemenova Wallison stated the patriotic euphoria of the war's early stages was due to an anticipation of a prompt victory. The enthusiasm started fading in the spring and summer of 1915, once news of troubles at the front and Russian army's defeat started to arrive. The Russians were confident that they would win the war. However, the celebrations died down as they heard about the losses at war and the mistreatment of their soldiers, which brought anger towards the Tsar.
During the war, Russia was falling behind in terms of industrialization and scientific development, but instead of advancing economically, they sent more soldiers to other wars as well. Russian soldiers were terribly mistreated and were not given the proper food, heating, or even shoes.
The dissatisfaction of the citizens led multiple revolutions, the first being the February Revolution. This revolution started with a riot demanding food and coal in Petrograd on March 8, 1917. On the first day of the riot, only 20% of the workers struck, but by the third day, about 54% joined in. Soldiers did nothing to regulate the chaos, which led to an increase of participants. On the fourth day, the soldiers fired at the workers, but also dissatisfied with the government. They later also joined in mutiny the following day.
Their immunity throughout the military district transformed the uprising into a revolution. According to expert Tony Ashworth, dissatisfied soldiers joining riots was a symbolic act that sparked the start of the revolution, as it clearly accentuated the inefficiency of the Russian government.
There is no doubt today that the revolution ignited spontaneously from the tinder of grudges held by soldiers and workers in St. Petersburg, joined by those of other towns and regions, by the Baltic Navy, and later by soldiers on the front lines. About the Russian Revolution of 1917, Michael, more and more Russians sided against the government, and as indignation grew, it was starting to foreshadow a clash between the Tsar and the people of Russia.
In March of 1917, Russians began to revolt against the Tsar. As these riots started to become more frequent, the country was thrown into chaos, and Tsar Nicholas II had no choice but to abdicate his throne. He and his family were captured and eventually executed by the people. Meanwhile, the Duma decided to create a provisional government, a temporary emergency government, led by Alexander Kerensky. Kerensky wanted to make a democratic government and wanted more involvement in the Russian economy. However, many challenges remained unsolved during the time of the provisional government as well.
Eventually, Vladimir Lenin, a Russian politician, became the head of Soviet Russia by overthrowing the provisional government and winning a power struggle against Leon Trotsky. Lenin was a follower of Marxism at first, an ideology that views social matters from a dialectical view, but later created his own doctrine called Leninism and gained more power. He created and led the Bolsheviks, an organization whose goal was to overthrow the provisional government and create a proletariat government
with no class consciousness.
However, despite of these many events that went against the existing government, the goal of the revolution to overthrow the existing government was later finalized through the Treaty of Creation of the USSR, a contract that legalized the union of Soviet republics that had existed since 1919, which was officially signed later in 1922.
After Lenin's death in 1924, Leon Trotsky and Joseph Stalin, a new appearance, stepped in to be the future leader of the newly formed Soviet Union. However, after their fight for the position, Stalin eventually took over and became the dictator.
As Stalin took power, the Russian government became totalitarian. They had complete control over the economy and suppressed freedom of speech. They had a secret police department to keep their citizens in check, and the government also mistreated their citizens, forcing them to follow Stalin and his laws. Stalin decreased the rations of the civilians and charged high taxes, using those to industrialize and further build the economy.
The rations given out to the people were slowly decreased, and soon, the new government became indistinguishable from the old. Millions of people died under Stalin's long reign, and the country's citizens were miserable due to the lack of food. When Stalin passed away, the Soviet Union went downhill and eventually led to its disbandment in 1991.
The revolution's success.
Yeah, but I think it was successful in terms of the implementation of a new Russian government and its influence on other countries.
But I don't think the main goal of the revolution was achieved. Their main goal was for a democracy to be implemented, but it ended up as a communist government. Even after the revolution, the government still had the full control of the country, and there still was social hierarchy as well.
But after communism was set in place, Stalin started to improve the Soviet Union, and he successfully brought it into superpower status by implementing new economic methods, turning it into one of the biggest economies in the world at the time. Hey, Hannah and Ashley, do you guys know some examples of how the world was influenced by the USSR?
Yeah, I think the Berlin Wall was built to split Germany. It was influenced by the Soviet Union, so.
Oh yeah, Korea was also one of the countries that were affected by the Soviet Union. They split into two after World War I, and I think they still remain split to this day.
Well, yeah, but aside from the political ramifications, the revolution itself caused a lot of deaths, and the government became totalitarian. It has the ability to censor out any media that is derogatory or against the government or goes against their words. So.
But it has the 12th biggest economy in the world as of today, indicating that Stalin's work on the economy was successful even though they mistreated their citizens.
Oh, really? Thank you. I should go work on my history project now.